So I have had the distinct honor over the years to meet many, many people in this line of work, people who are passionate and care deeply about local communities. And one of the individuals that I hold in the highest regard is a gentleman that I met, I don't know when, but many years ago, in one of these retreat type atmospheres, this network where we're talking about how can our community foundations make a difference in our local communities. And that individual is Jeff Yost with the Nebraska Community Foundation. And we're fortunate to have him with us here today. Jeff is president and CEO of the Nebraska Community Foundation, and his talented team are unleashing abundant local assets, inspiring charitable giving, and connecting ambitious people in 270 hometowns in 83 of Nebraska's 93 counties. Yost has dedicated the past 24 years of his career to Nebraska Community Foundation's mission and asset-based philosophies. Prior to the Nebraska Community Foundation, he worked for the state of Nebraska in the governor's office. Jeff and NCF have been featured in numerous publications, including the Nonprofit Quarterly, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and the New York Times. He pens a monthly column that is published in newspapers across the state. Please join me in giving a warm Minnesota welcome to Jeff Yost.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for sticking around. So a few things to start. One is Steve and I have known each other for, 18 or 20 years. And what Steve just had to say about me, I would say right back to him. All of you are very, very lucky to have Steve as a leader and a colleague and a friend. Steve has been trying to do the right thing for decades, and that work always leaves a really significant legacy. So please take a second and thank Steve. I have a fellow Nebraskan with me today. She actually turned the ringer off on her phone because her ringer is the Nebraska fight song. We're here in peace. So Cindy Huff is with me. She is from McCook, and McCook is halfway between Lincoln and Denver. So Cindy made quite a trek to get here to St. Cloud. Cindy's on our statewide board of directors. She's our chair of our diversity and inclusion committee, and she is also the chair of the McCook Community Foundation Fund and did a co-presentation with me today. So Cindy, thanks for coming along. Today, I want to tell all of you a story about Nebraska and how we've used community philanthropy as a catalyst to build communities and change our narrative about our collective future. I always feel it's helpful to start with something personal. So I grew up in a little town of Red Cloud, 40 miles from a movie, so you had to be pretty thoughtful about who you were going to invite on a date to a movie because you had to go in the car and you had to come back. So, little bitty kid growing up on a horse way out in the prairie. And one of the things I knew as a child is I was loved. I had all these people that were my friends and my family that loved me. What an awesome place to be a kid. I mean, you're just surrounded in love. And boy, if, there's always one thing that I want for my kids, it's that they are just surrounded in love. And I think it's something we should aspire to for every child. So as I continued to grow and so forth and so on, an odd thing sort of happened, and I don't think anybody knew it was happening. But as you're growing up, as you get into high school, as you start thinking about college, nobody was intentional about having a conversation with me that said, and maybe they meant it and maybe they didn't, but you're a bright, articulate kid. Why don't you go off to school? Go have a set of global experiences. And then when it comes time to have your career and raise your family, why don't you do it right here with us? And that story happened in Nebraska hundreds of thousands of times. And no society can sustain itself if its most important asset is people, and especially the next generation, becomes somebody else's workforce, somebody else's residence, and they begin to believe that their hometown isn't the place they were born, it's the place they live as adults. So all of the work we do in the Nebraska Community Foundation is intended to create that personal connection of hometown. Now, did every kid have an awesome childhood? No, every kid doesn't have an awesome childhood. One of our aspirations is to help more kids have awesome childhoods. So that's a big part of this is, how do we do this and how do we do this work? So we're not just raising money. Money's a tool. Money's one of many, many, many tools that we need to get this work done. But we are searching for hearts and minds. We're not searching for money. I'm going to posit to you today that we continue to ask some of the wrong questions around community economic development. For decades, the primary community economic development question we've been asking is one of jobs. How do we create jobs? How do we attract businesses, et cetera, et cetera? I think we ought to be attracting people. What I would say is, for the last 20 years in Nebraska, we've been doing a whole bunch of things incorrectly in terms of focusing on businesses that were going to create jobs. In Nebraska today, 1.9 million people, we're 60,000 employees short. And that's not just in Lincoln and Omaha. Talk to Cindy about McCook. They need more plumbers. They need more electricians. They need more nurses. They need more teachers. They need more CNAs, on and on and on and on, right? So in my opinion, our community economic development question today is not jobs. The question should be, why here? Why do I want to live and work and raise my family here? The question should be one of community. So there's some materials on your tables, and I would encourage you to grab some of those. One of them looks like this, and I'm going to start with that. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to get around to that report that's sitting there too. So I put 8 on every table. So if you have 9 at your table, there's probably an extra one at a neighboring table. The first thing I want to start is with this, because if we want to change the conversation, if we want to change the conventional wisdom, if we want to change the self-fulfilling prophecy that we have about ourselves and our communities, we can't start with what's wrong. We have to start with what's right. People don't want to invest time and talent and treasure in stuff that's broken. They don't want to invest time and talent and treasure in something that is the community equivalent of a going out of business sign in a business. They want to invest time and talent and treasure in something that is hopeful, something that is futuristic, something that we can all be a part of. So let's go through some of the words on this sheet. And some of the words on this sheet are the foundational principles of the Nebraska Community Foundation. And what Steve has really asked me to dig into is how we've built our network. So what I'm giving you are the building blocks of our network. So it starts with those first words: abundance and assets. It's not scarcity, it's not needs, it's opportunities, not deficiencies. Everything we do is about helping people become comfortable and good at inviting other people into community with them, to ask them to co-create the future. People own what they help build. If we just do things and they're services, that's not appreciated. People own what they help build. So how do we invite lots and lots of our neighbors into community building with us? It's incredibly important to build relationships before you need them. This is something fundraisers will talk to you about ad nauseum, is you can't show up at a first meeting and just ask somebody for money. You've got to build relationship. You've got to build commonalities. You've got to find out what is the mutual benefit. Because what we find is, as we're doing that work, people talk themselves into giving. You know, there is no such thing as my donor or your donor. They have sovereignty. And this is true of every one of us, right? We have sovereignty over how we spend our time, where we make our gifts, where we choose to work, who we choose to live with, et cetera, et cetera. So individual sovereignty is this huge part of the work we do. and a huge part of ABCD. And then as you look at the bottom one here, all of you are really playing this role. Volunteer associations, and in our case, we call them community-based affiliated funds. They're incredibly powerful, and they're an essential part of community building because they are all about connection and co-creation. So flip to the next page. The reason we do this asset-based community development work is very simple. In the Midwest in particular, we take lots of stuff for granted. You know, one of the things we've taken for granted for decades in my little hometown is all these amazing women that show up to feed people at a funeral. Right? Lots of those women, my mom's 90, and lots of her friends have passed away, and lots of her other friends that were doing this stuff. It's just not the same deal. Okay, so what are we going to do to continue to provide that support in that time of need? Right? And we can take that question all over our community to say, who's doing amazing stuff? How do we lift it up? How do we connect it? So Fred was talking today about a whole bunch of things that I would term connectorship. I think one of the most important things we need in our communities isn't necessarily leadership, it's connectorship. It's people making these relationships, inviting people into community building with one another, and then beginning to dream bigger dreams about what we could do together. So part of what we have to stop doing is we have to stop assuming that things will just keep happening the way they always have. Right? How do we invite people into this process? The next part of the network stuff really has to do with complexity. So let me give you just a little background on it. A network is defined as a group or system of interconnected people or things, and networks tend to be complex. With technology and more information than we can process at our fingertips, our world is becoming more and more complex every day. So in order to understand effective networks, I think we first must understand complexity. The best framework I've come upon, it's the next page in this handout, is the Canafin Framework. It's by David Snowden. David Snowden talks about it as a sense-making device, and I like that a lot. How do you make sense out of stuff? How do we create meaning? This was introduced to me by St. Cloud's own Kathy Allen. You guys have a world-class scientist and author here in St. Cloud, and I hope you appreciate her, because at the Nebraska Community Foundation, we've invited Kathy to be a part of our network and our community building and our board development for a decade. Kathy's been an extraordinary friend and in her words, beneficial virus for us. So let's talk just quickly about the Canafin Framework and how it relates to networks. If you start in the bottom right-hand corner, think of the bottom right-hand corner as a broken bone, a little kid with a broken arm. We know what to do, right? We set it, we put a cast on it, we tell them it's going to itch, that'll make it better. Now the technology's evolved a little bit, right? And so there's air casts and removable casts, but pretty much we're still just putting a cast on a broken bone, right? We think of lots of our community problems in the upper right-hand corner, complicated. I'll posit to you that complicated is sending a person on the moon and getting them home safely. That's an enormous amount of science, all sequenced and precise and, in the right dosage. And there might be a little bit of luck that goes along with that, but it's almost all science because you can connect some of those dots. I'll submit to you that community building is complex. So if complicated is sending a person on the moon and getting them home safely, complex is raising a child. Parenting's a whole lot more than science. There's good science that goes into it, right? But what do you have to be if you're parenting? Adaptable, patient, silently outraged. But all of these things, right? It just we have 3 kids. all three kids on very different paths, all amazing individuals, all going to do great things with their lives, but there was no playbook. There were things that we learned. There were things that we talked with our parents about. There were things we talked with our friends about. There were things we did differently with the third kid than we did with the first kid. But whew, that's community building. There's too many variables to understand. There's too many different elements. So it's emergent practice. And lots of times we assume community building is formulaic. It's not. It's relational. Community building is relational. It's all the stuff that Fred was talking about today. Healthy communities have an enormous amount of trust, mutuality, and forgiveness in them. And as we're doing our community building work, if we can continue to really focus in on those three words, I think we'll get a long ways. And then I'll just say, as the last part of this, you don't want to be in the bottom left-hand corner. Then I'll just leave it there. One of the most important things we've learned about complex organizations is complex organizations, in order to be effective, have to over-communicate. I have absolutely no problem in my organization if somebody tells me something 3 times. No problem. Because I am not worried about efficiency. I am worried about effectiveness. Because we are in the people building business. We are not in the widget building business. I'm an economist. I understand marginal costs. We understand efficiencies. So there are process things we can do efficiently. But you as board members, I encourage you to never ask an efficiency question. Your staff are the people that should be worrying about efficiencies. You as policymakers should be focused on effectiveness. Is that making sense? All right, let's keep flipping through here. The evolution of networks. So we're starting to get to the meat of this. So networks usually start with just a whole bunch of different scattered emergence, right? George H.W. Bush talked about 10,000 points of light. Cool. So what? You know, that was awesome that we had 10,000 points of light. I had a friend that was one of those points of light. It was very cool. Then my question was, and? So that's part of what we're trying to figure out in Nebraska. There's all these amazing people doing amazing things in their particular place. How do you connect them? Because the most powerful, I'm going to flip back to the front sheet. The most powerful associations we can have are associations of associations. That's what you're building here. That's what we're building in Nebraska, because that is cross-pollination. Okay, let's go back to the network slide. So when we first started the Nebraska Community Foundation, I was the first employee. It was started a few years before that. So let's just, for round numbers, 30 years ago. We really had a hub and spoke model. There were a whole bunch of little nodes out there, and almost all the communication would come to Lincoln, and then we get somebody in touch, and then, you know. So it's kind of like the way a telephone system used to work, right? My grandmother was one of those operators where you had to call the operator and she would connect you. That's a hub and spoke model. As you continue to move through network theory, what you're trying to do is get the center out of the middle. You're trying to get the hub. You're not trying to make the hub disappear, but you're trying to get the nodes in connection with one another. Okay? And then once you get to the far right-hand side, that's where the best innovation happens, because what you want the right-hand side of this to be, the core periphery, is you want it to be like a sponge. So a sponge absorbs and a sponge releases, but when you squeeze a sponge and all the water comes out of it, what happens? It goes back to its original size. That sponge is your values. You want your values to be there, no matter if you're absorbing or releasing. And a sponge is always available to be there to absorb more information, right? Because almost good innovation is going to come from the outside in. Innovation seldom comes from the middle. All right. Now you come to something that, so we went from a nice PowerPoint slide to me using a ruler. So one of the things we spend a lot of time on in the Nebraska Community Foundation Network is helping community-based affiliated funds build unrestricted endowments. We now have 81 community-based affiliated funds that have at least $10,000 of payout every year, which we've determined is kind of a tipping point to go from volunteers doing reactive grant making to proactive grant making. So this network slide is just the peer learning and the peer connections we've made between our community-based affiliated funds that are working on unrestricted endowments. And there's all this good stuff that comes from those connections not being through Lincoln. I spend a huge amount of time as a connector, but that's not to control. It's to do what Steve talked about in our mission statement. It's to unleash. There is so much tremendous potential. If you'll go back to that ABCD slide, why do you focus on the stuff that's invisible? Because there's always more potential in any one of our communities than any one person knows. Community building is maybe the greatest team sport we have. And we ought to think about it that way. We ought to think about it as a team. So that's one example of what a network begins to look like on one particular issue over a number of years, with now hundreds and hundreds of volunteer affiliated fund leaders teaching one another what they've learned. And it is powerful to learn it from a peer. And the more that we can sort of get the experts to be in a helping, empowering space as opposed to a power over space, the most important word in the Nebraska Community Foundation Network is with. We work with people. Everybody that's a part of the Nebraska Community Foundation, it's entirely a willing partner system. Well, we don't want to make somebody be somewhere they don't want to be. That's going to be a drain on their resources and ours. All right. One more slide. We've done lots and lots of board development work over the years. Most board members think their job is down in the fiduciary part of that triangle. And what I would say is the fiduciary part of that triangle certainly has something to do with mission fulfillment, but it mostly has something to do with keeping the doors open. So at the Nebraska Community Foundation, we have a statewide board of directors. We have in-person board meetings every quarter. All of our fiduciary elements of our board meetings all happen remotely. So all of the time we spend in person is intended to be up in these strategic and generative areas, because our role is to help people imagine a better future. And I don't know what the future looks like. I spend a huge amount of time thinking about the future. I don't have a clue. Things are changing so rapidly that it's almost impossible to keep up, right? Pretty sure none of my 3 kids know what their jobs are going to be in 20 years, because their jobs may not have been invented yet. So if we are community builders, and we are probably the only people that have any discretionary money for community good, because government certainly doesn't have any discretionary money for government or for public good anymore. We need to figure out ways to spend more and more time up in that generative space. So think about that as it relates to your board meetings. Think about it as it relates to how do we spend our time together? And if we spent more time in that generative space, would we actually have more fun? Would we be more excited about coming to meetings? Would we be more excited about staying a little later or working a little harder? My guess is yes. All right, now I'm going to ask you to pull out a different thing. I'm going to ask you to pull this out. It's in the middle of the table. So a big part of how we've decided to try to quote unquote govern this network isn't through command and control. Our role is to empower. Our role is to educate. Our role is to connect. Our role is to, in some cases, correct, but then make sure we are also forgiving, because we're building relationships, right? And we're a value-added partner to help community leaders do what they signed up to do. And very seldom when you start an organization and people are like, okay, now I guess we need a board of directors. Very seldom do like 3 different people put their hand up and say, I want to be treasurer, I want to be treasurer. Right, that is a laugh line. Right, I don't need an amen, I just need a laugh. All right, so I'm gonna work you through sort of how we've gone from having a strategic plan to what we now call a strategic framework. And it has everything to do with the fact that we don't know what the future looks like. So we wanted to create this. In some ways, the Nebraska Community Foundation is open source architecture. It's like we're building a community development wiki. And this strategic framework is an illustration of that open source architecture. So if you look at our vision statement, and that's on page 4 of that annual report, Nebraska is a place where hometowns are achieving their dreams. So that's not our work, right? That's our vision of what we hope is going to happen throughout Nebraska. Our mission, so the work of the Nebraska Community Foundation, Steve read it before. We unleash abundant local assets, inspire charitable giving, connect ambitious people, and build stronger communities in a greater Nebraska. The next page is extraordinarily important because we're a value-added partner, and we don't do services, and we don't do work for people, we do work with people. So part of what was incredibly important in this strategic framework is to define what we do and what we don't do. So I'm not going to read it to you, but what we do is we're a value-added partner, and we are happy to let things sit in stasis if a community doesn't step up and do their part of it. And everything's fine. You know, we know how to manage all the money, right? We know how to do the fiduciary stuff. But community leaders have to be motivated to build their community, because the only people that can build and sustain a community are the people that live and work there. Any of the rest of us, we're spectators, we're helpers, we're cheerleaders, but we can't build it for them. Okay. Page 7, if you look at the 6 goals that we've identified as the work of the Nebraska Community Foundation, I'm just going to pull out a couple of them for you. The first one, affiliated funds have the capacity, competence, and confidence to inspire, lead, and support progress in their place. We're trying to achieve goal number 1 to a large extent through leaders of other funds. So people like Cindy serve in a mentoring capacity, and she is willing to go to neighboring towns, tell McCook's story. The most important part she can talk about is not just what worked, but what didn't. What have you learned? How you did it as a team as opposed to individually, etc. And that's one of our goals, is to try to get to the point where all 6 of these, to a large extent, are being achieved through people in the network. We have 25 employees in the Nebraska Community Foundation. We have 1,500 of these volunteer affiliated fund leaders. In any particular year, we'll make 30 or $35 million worth of grants. Last year, I think we had, I don't know, I think we made almost 6,000 grants last year. There's a lot of moving parts here with very, very little professional staff. And the whole idea is like, what's minimum viable product? Because we're convinced that communities can only be built by community members. And if we accidentally over-professionalize something, well, that's not the tipping point we're looking for, right? So we're growing and learning and adapting. This is an emergent organization. I talk about the Nebraska Community Foundation as an adolescent all the time. So adolescents, their pants are too short. They have some pimples on their face. Their hair's probably kind of greasy. You know, they're just kind of bumbling around. Well, I don't think we're exactly bumbling around, but we're very much an adolescent learning our way into this. And I would encourage all of you to think in those terms, that it looks to me like everything that you're doing here with community giving, you too are an adolescent. That's awesome. Think about all the stuff you learned as an adolescent. Think about how much stuff you could remember when you were an adolescent. Right? Adolescence is awesome. Don't be in a hurry to get through it. Stay in that emergent space as long as you possibly can. So what I'm going to do to wrap this up, and Steve, I hope this is helpful in terms of how you build out a network and how you really create this. I'm going to do two quick things. So there's a few clippings attached to this. David Brooks had come to Nebraska in 2019 and had actually visited McCook and wrote a column primarily about McCook, which was pretty fun. And then one of the communities we're going to watch a video on, actually, it's the first video. The last article here is about a place called Albion. In Albion, the county is about 5,000 people. Their population increased in the last census. They're 100 miles from Lincoln or Omaha. So they're a ways out in the country. I mean, it's corn and cow country. They've done all sorts of amazing community building work in Albion the last few years, and we actually had this article written as a form of actually presenting the transfer of wealth study that we're going to sort of finish up with today. So if you have an opportunity, I really encourage you to both read the David Brooks article on McCook and this article by the Flatwater Free Press about Albion. So, Aaron, if you would please start with the Boone County story.
Boone Beginnings is built on a 5-acre site. We're a 12,500 square foot facility that can service 80 children. We had to raise $2.8 million, and then we wanted to have a cash reserve so that we could hire our employees ahead of time, and we wanted a fund to sit on top of the building so that the child care revenue could pay for the child care costs and the building would operate without impact to the business.
Welcome, everybody. I appreciate everybody taking the time to be here today and be with us for our open house.
This dream started at a community visioning session about 5 years ago, and of all the things that came up that our community could grow and improve on, childcare came up, and the foundation asked me to just do some research and find out what were the challenges our providers were facing and what was going on across the state. And, you know, through a few other initiatives that supported our local providers and started an after-school program, it just became obvious that the best way to impact capacity and quality in our community was to build a center.
I got involved with the child care facility because we started having a real issue with trying to find employees. I managed the local ethanol plant, right? And we had folks leave because they couldn't find childcare. We had people who couldn't take jobs because of it. And from my standpoint, I got into it from purely an economic development piece. I was interested to see how we could keep Albion growing, and it's been a great journey to get to this spot where we're at.
We struggled finding daycare for the longest time, and when this place was going to be built. We were super excited about it. And
It makes going to work way easier. It makes me enjoy going to my job instead of worrying and making sure that he's okay and that he's taken care of. And I know that his future will be bright just for the fact that he has this early foundation.
90% of brain development happens before the age of 5. We're the ones helping those children learn their social emotional skills, basically building the foundation that's going to pave the rest of their life.
You know, the Boone County Foundation Fund was really the impact group that started the question of what's going on and what do we need to do to address it. In the early years, we did things like support new providers starting in homes and curriculum support, and the Foundation Fund supported us through all of that. And that was no different when we came back with this huge ask of doing this big project.
I believe this center is really going to provide to the community a reason to come back to. So some of the main things that people, when they move, they're looking at housing, they're looking at jobs, they're looking at school systems, but anymore it's early childhood. Where can my child go and be taken care of so I'm okay going to work day to day?
I think Boone Beginnings will have a tremendous impact on our future here because a lot of communities are struggling with the same challenges we are and shortage of childcare, and by solving it here, it just gives us a great advantage. And really, it's just the beginning of what it can do.
So part of what we've done in the context of Albion is, you know, we help them raise money, we help them get organized, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it was actually connecting the dots so they were dreaming bigger dreams. And I don't know if community philanthropy has historically thought of itself in that context, but I think that's my job description. I think that's all I'm supposed to do, is help people think about what more can we do so more and more people want to call this home. The next video we're going to watch is from Cindy's hometown of McCook. I'm excited about this one. Cindy, is there anything you want to say about this before we get started? Go Bison. Okay, here we go.
Welcome to McCook. That one was bad. I just felt bad. I was like, welcome to McCook. Home of
Oh my God, this is...
Welcome to McCook. Woo! Welcome to McCook. What I really love about my hometown is just how everyone works together to like get things done. I love growing up here because I know all my neighbors and we can stay involved in the community. And there's always people coming up with like, new ideas to keep the community thriving.
And it's just a progressive, we believe in our community kind of place to live.
You know what I think about the roles the McCook Community Foundation Fund plays? It really serves as the catalyst for so many different community projects.
We want to be the movers and the shakers that kind of unite the groups that want McCook to be a better place.
So the YMCA has been part of McCook since 1928. We do feel that it's important to maintain that it's strong and it's vibrant. And so in recent years, we've helped with converting the water fountains. We've helped replace bleachers. One of the most important ones that we've just done recently that they are undergoing strategic planning project. They are looking over every square inch of the YMCA, looking at what needs to be done, what can be done, because we would like it to be around for another 100 years.
The COVID fund became available because we have forward-thinking people in our group. And so we decided to support the lunch program last summer during COVID through a variety of purchases.
Hey, how many lunches are you here for today?
Not necessarily food, but equipment that the school could use to provide the lunches. And I know they brought a hot cart and several different items that then the school could turn around and continue to use and continue to serve those lunches.
Several years ago, we started Bison Days, and they help fund an annual event where the community gets together along with the teaching staff, and we have mini courses for 2 days in just a variety of things throughout the community, from cooking to auto mechanics. And every year we probably have 2 to 3 students that take what they've learned and make a career out of that. And so we're impacting lives, and the Community Foundation allows us to do that with their generosity.
What was that first conversation like when you guys decided? So we started a podcast in McCook, and it's called I Remember When, and it's the uncommon stories of Buffalo Commons. And so we want to capture why we are what we are. Just our history that we fear is going to be lost. I think it's just important to know where we came from so that we know where we're going.
McCook Community Foundation Fund actually does a lot of things with families moving in, businesses coming and trying to get their roots set here in McCook, and not just in McCook. They're kind of outreaching to all the areas around us and helping you actually open your doors and going forward. The Hormel grant actually helps a lot of new businesses and existing businesses expand. And the business plan writing that they taught us was incredible. They've done a lot of different programs that they've had involved with the grant.
There you go. Youth Change Reaction is a group of young kids who help with different projects throughout the community.
I think the best part is we've supported youth, and we've given youth a voice and some empowerment to grant grants of their own.
I chose to get involved with YCR because I just really want to make McCook a place where I can raise my kids, and I can look back and just think I really enjoyed being able to help create this community that we have today. So we're working on a bike project that we've been working on for the past year. So basically we gathered up a ton of bikes and fixed them up. Now we're building a shed.
And it will be an honor system where people who come camping can borrow our bikes for the wonderful miles of trails that are being created. So it's one of those things that they're looking into the future and truly trying to make McCook a better place to live. McCook has been extremely fortunate to have people look at us and believe in us. Not only do we have the support from the Nebraska Community Foundation, but the Sherwood Foundation, and then McCook people. Not necessarily just the people who live here, but people who maybe grew up here. And so we are blessed and have had a lot of people step forward and say, we believe in giving back to McCook and making it a place that people want to call home.
So what? I love that video. I'm going to flip you to page 9, that annual report. One of the things I'm really, really proud to say, and part of it is circumstances, part of it is time, and part of it is this community building work. So there's never any magic bullet, right? It's always a combination of a whole bunch of stuff. But the results we're now getting from our youth survey that we do in dozens of schools around the state. In last year's survey, 64% of the kids we surveyed, about 2,500 kids, said they want to live as adults in a hometown like theirs, a small hometown. And if you ask them what was most important, and usually the answers were entertainment and all these other things. The 3 top answers this past year were safety, good schools, proximity to family. The next generation knows a whole lot more than we think they do. And we need to be inviting these kids in, just like they're doing in McCook, and supporting them in all sorts of different ways. They're super smart. They have incredible perspective. Help them, let them create the opportunity for them to co-create the future with them. Don't ask them to paint the fence. Say, what should we do here? Just ask open questions. See what they come up with. The YCR stuff, and we have lots of affiliated funds that have done this. It's really this intergenerational connection tool to encourage the next generation that their future isn't someplace else. Their future could be right here at home. Coming back home after college is an honorable path. So what I want to wrap up with, if you'll flip to page 20 and 21. We've worked on this for years, and last year we just completed our 3rd transfer of wealth study for the state of Nebraska. And what we've known for years is stories like mine. I'm the 6th of 6 kids, but only 2 of my siblings continue to live in Red Cloud. The rest of us are someplace else. Well, if my parents take what they have and divide it by the number of kids they have, what happens to 2/3 of their estate? The kids were the leading economic indicator. That wealth is the lagging economic indicator. 2/3 of whatever they made and accumulated during their lifetime leaves. So I'm proud to say that my folks are going to treat my hometown as the 7th child in their estate. So what we've tried to get started, and I think we're beginning to get quite a bit of traction on this, is a campaign to ask all generous Nebraskans to consider giving 5% of their estate back to their hometown and the charitable causes they care most about. We think the transfer of wealth in Nebraska is about 1.9 million people. We think in the next 10 years, it's about $100 billion. So if you just think of 5% of $100 billion, that's $5 billion. And what if a whole bunch of that ends up being in these unrestricted endowments in these places that becomes opportunity capital, so the folks in McCook can keep dreaming all sorts of much, much bigger dreams than what they're doing now. These are game changers. And these are things that not only capitalize the future, but it helps us create new habits of invitation and inclusion and abundance. So these are all the things we're trying to do to help change that narrative, that conventional wisdom, that self-fulfilling prophecy that I started out with. So we're going to watch one more video on the transfer of wealth, and then I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
There are people who have invested in us, and so an opportunity to give a little back for those who are going to follow us, it's just the right thing to do.
The transfer of wealth is this incredible opportunity for Nebraska. In the next 10 years, we're going to see $100 billion transfer from one generation to the next. Much of that money will go to heirs. Some will go to taxes. What we're asking generous Nebraskans to do is to think about contributing 5% to their favorite local charities, including their hometowns. That's, if you take 5% of $100 billion, that's $5 billion that can be used as a margin of excellence to build our hometowns for the next generation.
Hello, sweetie.
We think that in the next 20 years, 71 of Nebraska's 93 counties will be reaching their peak transfer of wealth. And in fact, some counties are already reaching their peak transfer of wealth today. So this isn't something we should just be talking about. The transfer of wealth is something we should be acting upon with all urgency and haste.
So please do it while everything's kind of good yet. You have to look in the mirror. What am I going to do about it? What's my responsibility? I mean, if you take my case, I've got a child in Omaha and I've got a child in Ames, Iowa. When I pass, they get the farm and they're welcome to sell it. Where's that money going to go? It's going to go to Omaha and Ames, Iowa. And so I think maybe the better decision may be to say, wait a minute, if I want to take part of that farm and give it to rural Nebraska, what would that look like? So you could designate a certain amount, you could designate a certain percentage. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. Maybe you give the kids 40% instead of 50%. If I have 2 children, for instance. Or we can come up with any plan you want to. The point is, what is our commitment to rural Nebraska, and how are we going to make Main Street stronger in our rural communities? That should be maybe one of our goals. And if that is, then amend your plan to make that happen.
With the 2021 Transfer of Wealth Study, Nebraska Community Foundation launched the 5 to Thrive campaign. And Five to Thrive is a call to action. It is asking all generous Nebraskans to consider leaving just 5% of their assets to their favorite hometown or to a charitable cause that's near and dear to them. If everyone did this, if everyone left 5, that would equate to $47 billion that could be reinvested in our communities to make our communities the kinds of places that people want to move back, raise their kids, that have all kinds of amazing amenities. There's really big power in numbers. If everyone did this, just think of the amazing things that could happen.
I think we should all think about what we want our fingerprint to be. We're going to leave one regardless. And we think about the people who have left fingerprints that we're benefiting from. We, as stewards who are taking care of the community today, need to at least consider what do we want our fingerprint to be 20, 30 years from now when the people who are currently in charge of the community look back. What are we going to do today that's going to make life and things better for them down the road? What do we want our fingerprint to be?
I'm really blessed to have a tremendous set of colleagues, great communication staff, great videographer. So we've really spent a lot of time and effort on the storytelling, and I hope you enjoyed the storytelling as much as I do. I don't get sick of watching those. So that is what I have for you today. Do you have any questions you'd like to pose to Cindy or me? Yes, sir. Can you hang on a second till she, yep.
A lot of foundations focus on asset growth for the foundation. And one thing that I'm seeing through your campaign is asset growth for the state and focusing on giving to your local nonprofit in your city. So what was kind of the board's thought and mind and kind of direction on that and thinking, how are we growing on the foundation side?
So I think it's actually always been our ethos. One of the things that didn't make sense to me when I joined the community foundation field 25 years ago was it was my perception, which doesn't mean it's a fact, it just meant it was my perception, that community was in small letters and really small font, and foundation was in capital letters and really big font. And that didn't make any sense to me. I don't want to be a nonprofit trust department. I want to be a community builder. So does the money matter? Of course the money matters, but there's a whole bunch of other things that matter just as much as the money. So, and again, you could have a board member respond to this as opposed to me, but I don't think we've ever been focused on asset growth for the sake of asset growth. We've been focused on assets are a tool that help us create payout that can really impact the lives of people in our hometowns. Cindy, anything you want to add to that? Okay. Yeah. Can you ask it again?
Can you talk a little bit about the progress and the results to date of the 5 to Thrive?
We're just, we released the study last November, so we're just really getting started with it. We have a number of affiliated funds that have said we want to talk more about planned giving than we historically have. I mean, these are not the conversations people want to have, right? What do people not want to talk about? Money and death. So it's not the easiest thing to just jump right into, right? I have colleagues on staff. We have lots of affiliated fund leaders that have become pretty experienced at this. There were some of them on that video. One of our affiliated funds is based in Nebraska City. They're undertaking a process of inviting lots of other local nonprofits to the table with them. They already have kind of a philanthropy council. McCook has a philanthropy council as well. to begin to, again, the whole idea of co-creation, how might we begin to co-create this? One of the most important things that I think is going to need to happen about the 5 to Thrive campaign is, in order to be a credible messenger, you're going to need to have done some modeling behavior yourself. So, if you will, the low-hanging fruit with all of this is the 1,500 people that are affiliated fund leaders in the Nebraska Community Foundation Network, and the board members of all these other nonprofits in Nebraska City. Because once somebody has created they've done their good planning, Cindy talked about this in our breakout today, you have to do good planning, and then hopefully philanthropy is a part of that plan. And once you've done that, then I think having the conversation about these things becomes much easier, because it's not, well, we should, or we must, or we can't, or you've worked it out. And we want this to work out because we want kids to, we want people to take care of their families. But there's so much money and it's moving so fast that we just need to be having lots of these conversations. Because once, what if everybody having an estate plan becomes part of the ethos of your community, and everybody remembering their favorite charitable causes becomes a part of that habit? I think you're having very different community dialogue in your home place. So we're really excited about the 5 to Thrive stuff. All of this stuff takes a fair amount of time to germinate, but we're doing, the transfer of wealth stuff. We're going to have a transfer of wealth presentation in front of every Rotary chapter in Nebraska. And we're having hundreds and hundreds of conversations with financial advisors all over Nebraska. And people like Cindy and her fellow board members and lots of other mentors. Cindy did a thing at the Nebraska Rural Community Schools Association. Cindy's a retired superintendent. She knows all those people. So it's like, who do you know that's already involved in an association? Well, that's your messenger. So one of my primary goals this year is to not talk about this, because I want thousands of other people talking about this to the people they already know and trust, as opposed to saying, who's Jeff Yost? Well, that's not what I want them to concentrate their effort on. I want them to hear from Cindy, because they already know Cindy, they already trust Cindy. And that's how we get new information out to people, is through existing relationships. Will you hand her the microphone, please? I know you can use your teacher voice, but.
One of the other things that came out was the number of people that have wills. And so, for a healthy community and to help the people in your community is to advocate for them to write their own wills, write their plans, even as young adults. Maybe it's not to do the 5 to Thrive right now and designate a 5% of your wealth, but have a plan. And that's an important message for healthy communities.
Yeah, why do you have a plan when your kids are little? Well, a lot of it's guardianship, right? Once your kids are grown, then it's a different set of issues. But part of what we want is for people to be super intentional. And one of the things that I was really pleased about in the Brooks article that he wrote is he said he heard the word intentionality over and over and over again. So for you guys as leaders in your communities, you may want to think about, what are those words I have my ear out for? And intentionality may be one of those words you want to listen for. Okay. Thank you very much.